Now let's start the shapes and geometry of sp3 d orbitals, in which sp and d orbitals mix. Now there are three types in which sp and d orbitals mix, which are the sp3d, sp3d2, and sp3d3. Here discussing the sp3d1, which is one s orbital mixing with 3p orbitals and 1d orbitals. As a result, 5 hybridized orbitals will form, which are the sp3d orbitals, as orbitals are named after the parent orbitals. So the name that will be is sp3d orbital. Now what we see is that there is 1s orbital, 3p orbital, and 1d orbital. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Total 5 hybridized orbitals will form after the hybridization of sp3 and d orbital. So now sp3d, 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 and sp3d orbitals are formed after the hybridization. Now getting towards the shape of the sp3d hybridized orbital, its shape is quite different from the other hybridized orbitals. Basically, 1s orbital is of this shape. P orbital has 3 shapes, which is one is in the x-axis, the other is in the y-axis, and z-axis. So when 1s, 3p, and 1d orbital mix up, intermix, hybridize, they perform hybridization, they have hybridization, then the hybridized orbitals will have a shape like this. There is one plane. 3 of the hybridized orbitals are in one plane, making a trigonal structure, and 2 hybridized orbitals are out of the plane. One is in the upward direction and one is in the downward direction. So these 3 orbitals are making a triangle, like they have a trigonal shape. So the name of this shape will be trigonal, and there is a pyramid on the upper side because of the upper hybridized orbital, and the lower side in the second plane. So the name will be trigonal pyramidal. The angle between the orbitals in the same plane will be 120 degree, and the angle between the other 2 hybridized orbitals and the orbitals in the same plane will be 90 degree. Getting towards the sp3 D2 orbital, in which we know that the orbitals are always named after the parent orbitals, so the name tells us that there is 1s orbital, 3p orbitals, and the 2d orbitals. When they mix up, or we can say when they intermix, they form 6 hybridized orbitals, as there is 1s, 3p, and 2d, which means 6 hybridized orbitals, which are named after the parent orbitals, which will be sp3 D2 orbital. So the shape of the sp3 D2 orbital is also different from the other orbitals and only similar to sp3d orbital, hybridized orbital shape. So but there is a point that there is an increase in the number of orbitals. So the shape will be octahedral, which means that there are 8 phases in this shape. 4 are in the one plane, and 1 is in the other plane. This is 1 phase, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. This one is the 5th, this one is the 6th one. The one behind it is the 7th, and the other one is 8th. So that means 8 phases named this hybridized orbital as octahedral hybridized orbital. getting towards the Sp3 D2, which is the sixth type of the hybridization, in which 1s, 3p, and 3d orbitals intermix to form Sp3 D3 orbital. As there is 1s, 3p, and 3d orbitals, the orbital number will be 7. The shape of hybridized orbital is pentagonal bipyramidal. But the question arises is how? There are 5 orbitals in one plane, and the other 2 are in the other 2 planes. The other 2 is in the other plane. Basically, this is one plane, which is in the y-axis, as we can see. So the phases will be 10. But the shape name is pentagonal pyramidal, as it makes pentagons and pyramids in its shape and structure. Summarizing the 3 shapes and the examples of these shapes: Sp3D, Sp3 D2, and Sp3 D3. As in the previous video, I've discussed the Sp3, Sp, and Sp2 hybridized orbital examples and the geometry and shape. And now in this video, I'm summarizing the shapes, the types of hybridization I have discussed here, which are the Sp3D, Sp3 D2, and Sp3 D3. Now, the basic point here is that in the Sp3D hybridization, the shape is trigonal bipyramidal. The example is PCl5. There are 5 hybridized orbitals. P undergoes hybridization, forming the 5 hybridized orbitals. Then the p orbitals of Cl, which is chlorine, overlap with the Sp3D hybridized orbitals. The structure formed is of this shape. There is a tricone and 2 pyramids, which means bipyramidal. Now in the Sp3 D2 hybridization, Sf6 is the example, and the shape, as we discussed before, is octahedral, which means it has 8 phases. The structure of Sf6 is described briefly here. As in one plane, there are 4 hybridized orbitals, and the other 2 are in the next plane. Now there is Sp3 D2 overlapping with the F molecules. The orbitals of F, which is the p orbital, overlaps with the Sp3 D3 orbitals, which are hybridized. As we know that the central atom is always hybridized. Now in the Sp3 D3, there are 7 orbitals, and the shape is pentagonal bipyramidal. Thanks for watching. In my next video, we will discuss how to find hybridization by seeing a molecule. I'll tell you some tricks and tips.